Hello and welcome into the Second City Hockey Ice Cold Podcast. Here again, with me is Adam Hess and lead Blackhawks writer for Go Fans Go, NHL correspondent, and managing editor of Let'sGoHawks.net, Greg Boyson, who joins us to pick his brain to talk us off the ledge. He's one of the more optimistic people we've interacted with. Try to get him on here, let him flex his muscles a little bit. Greg, thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me.
And Adam, I didn't give you a chance to introduce yourself, or rather to say hi. Say hi.
That's fine. I'm fine to just sit here and let you guys run the show this time.
Let's get it rolling. Obviously, biggest story from recently: Blackhawks lose 4-1 to the Wild, lose ground on Dallas and St. Louis, but most importantly, perhaps lose Duncan Keith for the rest of the regular season and maybe a playoff game or two after he went all Norman Bates on Charlie Coyle. Credit to Adam for that tweet that I saw last night. He does have a hearing scheduled, so that he could have a 5 to 6 game suspension, maybe longer. Guys, what are the ramifications of this reckless play?
Well, bottom line is if he's going to miss 2 to 3 games to start the playoffs, that's a first-round exit for the Blackhawks. He's the most important player on this team, how they're configured now. I mean, if you lose a Taves or a Kane for a couple days, you have multiple guys that can at least try and give you the production they do. You don't have another defenseman on this team that can do what Duncan Keith does, both defensively, in the neutral zone, in the offensive zone, with the minutes. So if he's going to miss 2 to 3 first games of the playoffs, it's. I know you said I'm Mr. Optimistic, but even the most optimistic guy in the world doesn't like that idea.
Yeah, I think especially, some of it might depend on how Crawford is. If Corey Crawford is able to play and can carry the load, maybe if they play the Blues, maybe they can get lucky. I think they're in the Blues' head a little bit, and the Blues are the Blues when it comes to the playoffs, and so they're going to have that pressure. But I think so if Crawford's there, then it'll be a big thing. But if the Hawks are hoping to make a run with Scott Darling in goal because Crawford can't make it, without Crawford and Keith, I mean, they're completely screwed. And there's we might as well start writing a eulogy for Puck Daddy.
Yeah, start draft previews.
Exactly.
I wasn't planning on doing that in April. What, in your guys' mind, is this as bad as other previous, really egregious violent stick plays? I saw people comparing it to McSorley's baseball bat years back. I don't think it's that bad. Obviously, it should. If there was probably 20 games left in the regular season, he would get 10 games in my mind. It was pretty violent. There was intent there, but I don't know if it's that drastic. I don't know if it's that drastic to compare it to a guy chasing someone down and using his stick as a baseball bat, as I said.
No, it's definitely not nearly as bad. This was more of a heat of the moment kind of thing. Let's not pretend for a second that Charlie Coyle's an innocent bystander in this. I mean, he pretty much slew-footed Keith to get that reaction. So let's not pretend that it was just out of the blue. I mean, Keith isn't a dirty player, but he has shown that he's got a short fuse, and when that fuse gets lit, he becomes full-on stupid, and that's what last night was. It was just stupid from a guy that wears an A, especially since he knows what the situation was last night. I mean, yeah, obviously these things aren't going through his head as he's laying on the ice, but Seabrook's already out of the game. It's 9 minutes into the game. Just, you know what? Yell at the ref, remember the play, and get him back later within the rule book.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I think, with his history, the elbow to Daniel Sedin, and then when he slashed Jeff Carter, which I think that one, catching him in the face, was more of an accident. I think he was just trying to hit him pretty good and didn't mean to get him in the face. But, with those past incidents, at some point you sort of gain a reputation as a player who is sort of opportunistic and, going after, and taking advantage of situations in which you can kind of injure a player. And obviously this is a situation when, Coyle was vulnerable to be injured. And I think sort of to Greg's point with just kind of knowing the circumstances, but also you can be frustrated about being taken down, but I would like to think that, with that happening right in front of the referee, I'd like to think that that was going to be called a penalty up until the referee saw Duncan Keith tomahawk him in the face and said, well, that is, much more egregious, and ran with that. And so, they probably still should have called the penalty on Coyle regardless, but given the situation, they handled what was most important for the time. But yeah, Keith that's definitely a dirty play. Definitely violent. I think, people that are saying that, he should get 10 games, stuff like that. I don't know if it's that horrible. I was not really surprised to hear that he's going to get an in-person hearing, and that my NHL app told me it was going to be tonight, so maybe we'll hear about the suspension before we even finish this podcast. But, that was a dirty play. Keith knows it. And, you kind of just got to accept that it happened, I think, and kind of move on. And, like Greg said, if the Hawks miss him for an extended period of time in the playoffs, even if it's just 2 or 3 games in that first round, they're done.
I have to say I really love the notion that somehow the Blackhawks are one of the dirtiest teams in the league, even though they're routinely in the bottom 5 and least penalized. And it's when they have these highlighted plays that people will pile on, and how they do this all the time. Social media is mostly stupid, but I was laughing at it reading these kinds of tweets last night.
Well, yeah, especially when they come from Boston Bruin fans of all people. It's like, come on, give me a break. Look at the numbers. Look at the numbers of penalties. The Hawks are since Quenneville's been here, pretty much they're in the top 5 in penalty minutes as far as least penalty minutes. How many players have been suspended? Not to, take away Daniel Carcillo, how many people have been suspended on the Blackhawks? It's rare. But yeah, they seem to have their moments in bigger stages. You think of Brett Seabrook in the playoffs against the Blues. Well, that comes in the playoffs. That's a national televised game. Everybody sees it. Whereas if something like that happens in the third game of the season, it's not going to get the attention that it did. But yeah, if anybody who thinks the Blackhawks are dirty, they weren't alive during the Norris division in the 80s and 90s.
My favorite hot take that came out of it that I saw was some dude got retweeted into my timeline saying that he was glad that play was exposing Duncan Keith as just an above-average defenseman with a baby temper and not an all-star or a superstar defenseman, which my response was, 3 Stanley Cups, 2 gold medals, 2 Norris trophies, and a Conn Smythe, but that's only above average. That's definitely not elite or superstar level for a defenseman.
Those are team stats, man. He had the great Anthony Niemi helping him along.
Yeah. Definitely. But yeah, I think, just the notion that Keith is a dirty player, I think, he's had dirty moments. I would call that a little more opportunistic than dirty maybe, and I think the Blackhawks are definitely not a dirty team. I don't even think, even when Daniel Carcillo is here, he has a reputation as a goon and kind of a dirty player. He never really had dirty plays when he was here. He just kind of got into some scraps, and I think he was maybe the most effective enforcer in terms of sticking up for teammates that the Hawks have seen. And so just with him, even when he was here, he didn't really make dirty plays. I think the Hawks tend to be on the opposite end of dirty plays, like Rafi Torres and on Hossa in 2012.
Please don't mention that, man.
Just a really, but just, it's just a silly notion to call the Blackhawks a dirty team.
No, that's just online butthurt, which is intensified this time of year.
Definitely. And I think, when the Blackhawks continue to run the NHL, people eventually get sick of them. And then, I think the one legitimate sort of character attack on the Blackhawks that I've seen, I would say semi-legitimate, is that, they tend to be kind of whiny maybe, complain about calls. But, when you're one of the better teams, sometimes you kind of expect calls to go your way. And, you're not going to keep your mouth shut if you think a call's wrong. So I don't even know if whiny is a good word.
It's dismissive. All right. So, prediction on the amount of games he gets, guys, and whether you would agree with it or just in general, that whole shebang.
I would say they're going to give him 6, the last 5 of the regular season, and then that first playoff game to kind of be like, hey, knock that crap off. I don't know if that's me wishful thinking more than.
See, optimistic. You're the optimistic guy. Thank you.
I would hope that it would be 6, but then again, this is the NHL, and you never know. You see stuff where you say, "Oh my God, that's an automatic suspension." The guy doesn't even get a phone call, and then you see other plays where you're like, "Oh, that's not so bad," and he's suspended for 4 games. So there's no consistency with the NHL, which makes it so much harder to predict something like this. But I'll predict 6 games, last 5, the rest of the regular season, and the first game of the playoffs. Anything after that is going to be really rough for the Hawks.
This is a league that reduced the suspension of a guy that cross-checked an official. So you're right on that surprising thing. Adam, go ahead.
For me, I think 6 sounds good as well. That was my guess as soon as they said it was an in-person hearing. I don't think that it really warrants more than that, especially, the league is definitely tends to view, or tends to try to avoid suspending players for too many playoff games. So I think at most Keith would get the 1 playoff game. I am curious to know if the match penalty works the same way with game misconducts, where that game counts as a game served. So if they give him 6, he'll only have to serve 5, and then he'll be back for the playoffs. I don't know if that's exactly how the rules work. I think that's how it works for game misconducts, but I know that match penalties are a little different.
From what I understand, match penalties comes with an automatic, like you sit out the next game unless the league rescinds it, because that happened to Wayne Simmons earlier this year when he punched McDonough.
Yeah.
They rescinded the match penalty. Obviously, they're not going to rescind that in this situation. They're gonna back that call. So he'll have. I don't know if that counts, that automatic. So they could say the 1 game automatic match penalty plus 5 or plus 6. But he gets the game no matter what.
Yeah, but I would say it's, obviously with him missing or with him getting an in-person hearing, that obviously means it doesn't mean it has to be, but it means it could be 6 or more. So I'd say it's a safe bet he's gone for these last 5 games, and then I'd be surprised if he missed more than 1 playoff game. But if they gave him 2 to really say, knock this shit off, I guess that wouldn't be necessarily that would be a reasonable suspension, I think.
We're not really going to touch on it, but we have to. I think something to keep in mind is the emails with all the concussions, and that maybe possibly they'd want to make an example. But then again, the NHL wouldn't necessarily, given who's in charge of the NHL, Bettman. I don't think they'd have the foresight to make an example of someone like Keith after all their shit leaks.
Yeah, and this really wasn't like a vicious elbow to the head or a boarding call. It was a reckless stick. So I don't know if they'll connect the two. I don't know if they're smart enough to do that. But and another thing that's so important when it comes to the severity of suspensions is if the player is injured or not. And Coyle got a few stitches, but he never missed a shift. And that for right or wrong, the NHL seems to weigh their judgment on how severely injured the player is, which I think is stupid. They're just waiting for guys to get hurt before they punish people. So who knows if that plays an effect. With the NHL, you never know. You're better off just throwing darts at a dartboard and seeing what number comes back.
Definitely true.
The rational side of me will say 6 and agree with you guys. The biased rosary beads holding fan will say 5. I really hope for 5. I hope he doesn't miss any playoff games. Let's move on to Corey Crawford. We're just all doom and gloom today. Brett, we bring you on to talk us off the ledge. Corey Crawford, as Mark Lazarus reports of the Chicago Sun-Times, has some kind of head injury. It's been compared to Brian Bickle's vertigo from last year's Western Conference Finals. He hasn't skated since, or rather, he hasn't played in the game since March 14th loss to the Canes. He hasn't skated in over a month, or rather, 3 weeks now, if my math is right, or a little under 3 weeks. He's not going to travel with the team to Winnipeg, and there's no timetable for his return. We were talking about Keith being the backbone of the Hawks and how a first-round exit is on the horizon. is this a bigger loss for them if he doesn't play in round one?
Oh, absolutely, no doubt. I mean, you can argue all you want about Patrick Kane being the most valuable player in the league, but Corey Crawford's been the most valuable player on this team. I mean, there's so many games that they had no business being in, but he got them there. And no disrespect to Scott Darling, he's a great guy, great story. You're not winning a Stanley Cup with him in the net. He showed that last night. I mean, 3 goals on 17 shots, not going to cut it. Yeah, he made some big saves, a 2-0 save, but, went down an hour and a half early on Jarrett Stahl. The puck went right over him. Went down early on the second. There's a world of difference between the two. Darling can steal you a game or two. Crawford can steal you a series or two.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And Darling, like you said, Darling, good guy, good story, and he's a more than serviceable backup in the NHL, but he is not a guy that you're going to win a Stanley Cup with. And that was even true last year. As hot as he got in that Nashville series, I think everyone knew the whole time that they were not going to win the Stanley Cup if Corey Crawford did not get back in that net and have some confidence between his ears. And, luckily that happened and the Hawks won the Stanley Cup, but it's not going to happen this year. I think, last time we did this podcast, Rob, you and I talked about how hopefully maybe he's just kind of getting rest and they're calling it an injury. That wouldn't necessarily surprise me too much. He's played a lot of minutes this year, and
That's really hopeful. That's really hopeful.
It's really, really hopeful. I hope it's not a serious head injury like Laz reports, especially if it's of the vertigo variety, because that could last a while. When you're paying a goalie that much and he's that important to your team, you definitely don't want to see him suffer that kind of serious injury. But yeah, I mean, if they don't have him. Even if they have Duncan Keith, if they don't have him, again, maybe they can will their way through the Blues, but they're not going to beat the Stars and the Kings or the Ducks. And, even if they somehow pull off a miracle and do that, at that point maybe you can start to believe. But I just don't think that they're going to win 16 out of a possible 28 games on the road to the Stanley Cup with Scott Darling in net.
Can they win a series with them? You just mentioned it. I think I'd say they could beat the Blues. I don't think really they can beat. I don't think they can beat the Preds. I don't think they can beat the Kings. I don't think they can beat the Stars, like you just said as well. But the Blues don't have much of that speed as much to abuse Scott Darling. But then again, the Wild don't either. And as Greg said, he was embarrassed on some pretty soft goals. Can they win a series with them? Should Crawford miss round one if this injury is really that bad, guys?
I think they could win a series, but I don't think Darling wins it for them. I think that they win it in front of him. So that's just, I think that he can play steady enough to win them 4 games, but I don't think he's going to be winning their games. I think he's going to be goaltending for 4 wins, more or less.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think they can win a series with him, but they would need a lot to go right. You would need the offense to show up, and you would need some unexpected big performances from some defenders who are question marks right now. You would need Trevor Van Riemsdyk to be solid. You would need a Christian Ehrhoff to maybe step it up. And you would need the offense. You would need to have at least 3 goals a game to win. That way, you would need that second line, Panarin and Kane, who have been ghosts these last 10, 12 games, to get back to their November, December form real quick.
Yeah, and you would need the penalty kill to be hot as well, and you would need your special teams to across the board be. The penalty kill would have to be 90%, and your power play would have to be at least 20 if you have a hope of winning that series with your backup in net. And last year Darling got hot for the playoffs, and I think sometimes that moment can kind of bring guys to another level. So maybe Darling's one of those guys that on that stage he kind of steps up his game and can play a lot better. But I think that I think he could maybe like Greg said before, he could maybe win them a game or two, but I don't think that he would win them the whole series. Maybe he gets them 2 of their 4 wins, but they'd have to win those 4 wins sort of not in spite of him, but with him, just kind of hanging in there.
Yeah, they would just need him to make the routine saves, and then maybe 1 or 2 big quote unquote spectacular saves a game. I think with Darling back there in the playoffs this year puts more pressure on the rest of the team. Or when they got Crawford out there, they know, okay, if we miss, we get caught in an odd man rush, we misread a zone entry, we've got Crawford back there. He'll bail us out because he's done it all year long, and you might not have that question mark. And Darling stepped in. Those first couple games against Nashville last year was great, but eventually the book came out on him. Shoot high, get him to move post to post. That book is out there on him now. He was still a bit of an unknown last year, but after seeing him 2-3 games in a row, the Predators had his number. And that scouting report has been out there for over a year, and he really hasn't done anything to make people try anything different.
So you don't think his struggles have been for lack of playing time? You think it's that he hasn't improved at all in any sense?
Well, I hesitate to even call it struggles. I think last night was really the only bad game that we've seen since he's kind of become the pseudo starter with Crawford and Nat. You look at those games against Calgary and Vancouver. He was great in those games, and they needed him to be great. They did not play very well in front of him in those games. I think he made 30 saves against Calgary. And so, I thought he was playing well last night. Was kind of an off night for him. I think he's been I think his struggles have come more from a lot more playing time recently and a little bit of a fatigue factor. Playing 3 games in 4 nights. That's a lot of a load on a goalie. And for whatever reason, they didn't want to play Michael Leighton in that back-to-back.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it struggling this year. I would just say that the league has adjusted to him, and he has yet to readjust back to the league. When he came in last year, he was a relative unknown. There wasn't a lot out there on him. He's a huge guy, which can be intimidating. He covers most of the net just by standing there. But eventually, teams started to figure out they adjusted. They started figuring out where his weak points are, and he hasn't readjusted back yet.
Mm-hmm. And his numbers this year, he has a .914 save percentage. There's not a whole lot more to ask for from your backup goaltender. Backups aren't really going to put up .920. If they were, they'd probably get a starting shot. So with a .914, you're not really going to complain about how he's played this year. So I think, he's played in 25 games now. That's a decent clip for a backup. Crawford was taking a lot of the load before. He was kind of getting spot starts. That I think was a little bit of a struggle. But now I think going from spot starts to playing 7 games in a row and 3 and 4 nights. Obviously, the third one's probably going to be the worst of the bunch, and so I think that he had been playing pretty well. And like Greg said, there's a book on him now, so teams know how to strategize. He's no longer just this 6'6" monster that's unsolvable. They know to kind of get him moving to side, and they know to shoot high on him.
All right, let's circle back to Crawford to finish up this piece. Gut feeling, does he play round 1, game 1?
I would say yes. Considering we still don't know the extent of the injury. The second they said he wasn't traveling with the team, I automatically thought concussion. That's usually a big sign when you don't travel.
Yeah.
So, I would say yes. If he's the kind of guy, if he's anywhere close to being ready, he's going to be out there. He's that kind of competitor. And so I would say yes. He'll be round 1, game 1. If he isn't, then
Lord help us.
Yeah, and if he's not ready for game 1, then I would be hard pressed to see him playing at all in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think that I think come playoffs, I think a lot of times guys play through things. So if it's not a head injury, if it's a shoulder or something, I think you'll definitely see him for game 1. If it is a head injury and they have no choice but to keep him out, then that's kind of so be it. But I think my gut feeling is that he will be back for the playoffs and that they're kind of giving him some rest right now. And maybe it's a minor concussion because, no
concussions are minor, Adam. Come on.
I don't know. You know
Not
what I
Colin
mean.
Campbell.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, man.
You know what I mean. If it's not something where he's, has to avoid light and sound and all that stuff. If he's, headaches and stuff like that. If he's getting closer to normal now, maybe he'll be back. Otherwise, if it's a concussion, you almost wish they'd rather err on the side of safety. As much as you want to win a Stanley Cup, you're not going to win them in the future without him. They don't really have any good goaltending prospects. So maybe if it's a serious concussion, kind of let him rejuvenate and see if you can get hot with Darling and, hope and pray.
Yeah, you guys aren't concerned about that. That's a great point, Adam. You guys aren't concerned that if it is in any facet of concussion or some kind of head injury that they might be throwing him into the fire. If he's not, I mean, Greg, you said like they'll throw if he's 90% ready, that he's the kind of guy that'll play. But isn't there a risk with that if it's a head injury? Is there a concern with that for like the short term?
Yeah, there should be concern with that, but this is a team that pretty much for the last 5 years is only worried about the short term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're another year older, and you got a bunch of guys that were brought in here for a playoff run. You gave up a lot at the trade deadline to bring in the pieces that are supposed to help you. So they're obviously only concerned with up until mid-June this year, and then once the playoffs are over, they'll start worrying about things. So, I'd like to think the Hawks would be more concerned, but the way this season has gone with a lot of things they've handled, that's another reason why I would expect him to be out there game one. If he says he's good to go, that's what they're going to roll with.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, this is Second City Hockey Ice Cold Podcast. Greg Boyson is joining us, talking Blackhawks hockey as always. Let's move to lineup questions, guys. Greg, I kind of talked about this with you last night. Tavo's been playing center he's been the second center, rather, the past few games with Artem Anisimov out with a lower body injury. And you have one of the more creative, more talented lines in the league. But you and Gianluca Costello are saying that maybe he's not always in the best position, that he's not exactly prepared for that role yet. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, you got to think where he's been playing on the third line, where he's had more defensive, responsible wingers. Playing with a Thomas Fleischman, playing with Andrew Shaw, whoever has been on his wings, Richard Panik even. Those guys are more two-way type players. So he can be more creative, more risk-taking in the offensive zone. Being out there with Patrick Kane and Artemi Panarin, you've got to be the defensively responsible one. And I think that's a big adjustment. That's where Anisimov knows that line. Now, is he the most talented player in the world? No. Is he the most talented center on the Blackhawks? No. But he's the right fit for that line because he knows, hey, 88 and 72 are going to go low. I have to be ready to jump back. I have to be the first guy back. Whereas normally a center, is going to try and get down low more and won't be the first guy out. But he has to make more of adjustments. And Tavo just isn't used to that, playing with these guys just for a couple of games. Because normally a winger should have been the guy that got back on that second goal, but Patrick Kane was down low. Panarin was too far down on the other side. Tavo, realized, oh shit, that's my guy, and it was too late at that point. With more time playing with those two, he'll learn to make that adjustment. But when Anisimov comes back, which should be Friday from all accounts, he'll be right back on the second line, and that's where he belongs.
Adam,
yeah. I like seeing Tavo in that role. I think that in a lot of ways that's kind of the second line of the future. But I agree with a lot of what Greg said. He's not ready for that role yet. I think one of the benefits of having Anisimov on that line is that Panarin and Kane can create. Like that's what they do best: is create plays, create lanes, create shots. And Anisimov doesn't really have to be creative with them. He can be bare bones. Be in position, be in front of the net, generate some traffic, raise some hell a little bit, and then be defensively responsible, because sometimes they're not going to be as defensively responsible as maybe they should be. And that's kind of the chance you take when you have two, all-world elite talents, offensive skill guys like that on the same line. And so, in a lot of ways, like I said, maybe that, Tavo between those two is kind of the second line of the future. But for now, Anisimov is a guy that should be filling that role. And, for all the reasons that Greg said, I don't really have anything to add on top of it other than that, Tavo has been very effective with Thomas Fleischmann. They've generated some really quick chemistry, and that line has been great. And Tavo's been hot ever since they made that trade. He's had a lot of confidence, and that's a big thing for him. And so I think that keeping him on that line and keeping the 72-15-88 line together, at least for the start of the playoffs until things aren't really clicking enough, and maybe you need to kind of bring out the line blender, I think for now that's the right direction to head.
While the defense is in shambles, isn't it actually nice to finally have 4 competent centers, guys, after years of scrounging everywhere?
Yeah, but I'd trade 2 of those competent centers for 6 defensemen.
Yeah. Absolutely. You got to find a silver lining, though. I saw this point brought up last night as well. The Ladd-Taves Hossa line hasn't been awful, but they all really play the same kind of game. Ladd is a guy that crashes the net. He's not fast. He doesn't have that same sudden step he used to when he was younger anymore. Would it maybe fit the Hawks to possibly put maybe Kane up there, Panarin up there to change things up with maybe Panarin with Taves and Hossa, or Kane with Taves and Ladd? Mix up that top 6, because they're not producing at that clip that you would want the top line to really play well, and that's sort of been obviously the strength the Blackhawks have had in recent seasons.
I would leave them where they are, at least to start, and see what happens. That's a line built for the style of postseason hockey, where the game slows down, there's less room on the ice, and plus that's a really damn good defensive line. You put that line out against your opponent's top line, and you kind of wash. And then you hope that the Kane line, takes advantage of playing against the other team's top defensive line. And then you have a third line with Fleischmann and Tavo who can hopefully bumslay and get you those goals. And then your fourth line is not too bad either. They can come up with a goal or two. So I think that first line is built more for playoff hockey than regular season hockey, where the game slows down and you need the bigger guys, the muckers, to get to the front of the net and to play some big defense.
Yeah, I think Ladd is still the right guy for that role, especially because when you compare, when you look at so much of why Hossa and Taves had success over the last 3 years was because they had Brandon Saad with them. And Ladd, while he doesn't have the speed to match Saad, he plays that similar kind of, go to the net, hard-nosed kind of hockey. That Saad plays, and so that style really fits Taves and Hossa's game. That's the kind of alignment that they need, while they kind of do a little bit more freewheeling, a little bit more creativity. And so I think that just leaving that line the way it is for now is the best, most solid bet for the Blackhawks.
However they set the lines, is it time to? Well, not time. I think that the time has passed. How concerned should we be that Dale Weiss isn't really doing anything or getting much playoff time? Or should we expect him to be Brian Bickle? I'm joking, of course, when I say that in the playoffs. Because Greg, you say Thomas Fleischmann and Tavo on that third line. I noticed I noticed no third or second partner there.
Well, I mean, I think they'll alternate between Panik and Weiss. Q will play the hot hand. And to be honest with you, when they traded for Weiss, that's the first guy I thought of was Bickle, because Weiss has had a couple of those postseasons. A couple years ago for the Canadians, he came up huge and had some big goals. He can be that kind of guy, but he has been a major disappointment since coming here. And once you play yourself in the Quenneville's doghouse, it's very hard to get yourself out of it and stay out of it. You can ask a lot of guys what that's like.
Ask Victor Stahlberg.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Victor Stahlberg's white dress shoes are still sitting in the doghouse somewhere. It's so tough, and and you know what? He's deserved to be scratched. He's been pretty much useless since we got him, and it's been a disappointment because he was having a good year with Montreal. This is the perfect situation for him where he doesn't. And he was playing top-line minutes in Montreal at points of the season, and he doesn't have to do that here. But for whatever reason, he's not producing. I think he's just. There's been a couple times, and especially in that Vancouver game, where he just couldn't receive a pass. He had right after the Canucks tied the game late, he was wide open in front of the net and dicked the pass. And I think he's just gripping his stick too tight because he's. With a team like the Blackhawks, and he knows that his playing time is, in jeopardy, and he's not responding well. But I think if the Blackhawks are going to make a deep run and get to where they want to go, you're going to need Dale Weiss to contribute at some point in the postseason.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything Greg said. He has been a letdown. When they said, that they wanted to get a gritty scoring winger for Tavo, and then they went and got him later that same day, and it was Dale Weiss, you're like, okay, that is the perfect gritty scoring winger, because, everyone knows the sort of grinding side of kind of mentality of Dale Weiss, but he also has that goal scoring touch. And like Greg has mentioned, he's done it in the playoffs before. So it's been disappointing to see him struggle. I don't even know if he has a point since coming to the Blackhawks.
1 assist. He's got 1 assist.
Yeah, 1 assist. So that is, that's obviously hugely disappointing.
That's top production. That's top production. I like it.
And I'm pretty sure that was a secondary assist that he got.
Those still count. Those still count.
Yeah, and I mean, in a lot of ways, I think Richard Panik kind of got scratched by default when they traded for Fleischmann and Weiss because, Bowman kind of said, hey, look, I got these guys. And Quenneville said, okay, you got these guys. And so he played them. But Panik, I don't really think he had done anything wrong. And he's been
really good, actually.
He's been a huge pickup for the Blackhawks. I mean, when you trade Jeremy Morin, who had zero future here, again, to get Richard Panik, that was a big move, and that was a very smart move, and he's been very good, and he's been a very good depth player, and so he kind of got the short end of the stick, and then like Greg said, it's hard to get out of that doghouse, and as soon as he got his chance, he came in, he scored 2 straight games, and that I mean, if you want to get out of the doghouse, that's what you got to do, and he did it, and so I think Panik is a guy that is I hope is going to be able to find a regular roster spot. But I do agree that Weiss needs to be a guy that can contribute come playoff time. I wouldn't really mind seeing maybe Panik get a shot on that 4th line, maybe in Desjardins' spot. But I do know that Desjardins and Kruger and Shaw were so effective last year that keeping those 3 together is probably one of the best options that the Blackhawks have at this point.
Yeah, Desjardins is kind of he's one of Q's pets, favorites. He had that little hot streak early in the year where he scored, three goals in 4 games or whatever it was. There's some nights I watch him and go, why is he in the lineup? But again, I understand he's got that 4th line because they were so good last year, and I don't have a problem with that. But if you get Weiss and Panik both getting exactly what you want out of them at the same time, then I think you have to really think hard about sitting a Desjardins. That's a good problem to have. Hopefully they get faced with that problem. You talk about Panik, and we just mentioned Victor Stahlberg. I think Panik is what the Blackhawks were hoping with Victor Stahlberg. Now, he doesn't have the offensive skills quite, but he has the speed and the size that Stahlberg has, and the difference is he can actually finish a play when he gets close to the net. Stahlberg, never met a goalpost he didn't like when he was here in Chicago.
I'll never forget I think it was a penalty shot when he hit all 3 posts. That was just so Victor Stahlberg.
Yeah, that was the Stahlbergiest Stahlberg play of all time.
That is just Victor Stahlberg's
that's his career.
Blackhawks career in a moment.
Yep. When he that should just be, instead of a picture of him on Hockey Reference, it should be just a GIF of that play.
It's always the most shocking thing whenever he scores a goal too. I remember last year playing Nashville. He's the one that I think he's the one that picked like that when Crawford mishandled the puck, and he's the one that like took it away from Crawford. He's the one that scored. Like, and you think Victor Stahlberg, like you're not sure how to comprehend it.
Yeah, he's a special player, and not quite in the way that we talk about Tavo.
How big has the return of Marcus Kruger been? Because the PK has been 7 for 7 since he's come back. That's sort of where he lives. Obviously, he's a guy that takes most of the defensive zone draws, other than Taves. Greg, talk about why Kruger's so effective in revitalizing the Blackhawks' defensive play.
Well, I think, he obviously shows how valuable he is, but it's hard to imagine that one guy is responsible for success of, 8 to 10 guys that make up the penalty kill unit. But he obviously is a big factor, and I think having him out there just gives confidence to the rest of the penalty killers as well, knowing that you have your best killer back out there. And when you talk about special teams, it's all about confidence. Look at the power play a month ago. They were not even a month ago. 2 weeks ago, they were the number one power play in the league, and now they couldn't get a goal to save their lives. And now the penalty kill, all of a sudden, they killed that double minor in Vancouver. They killed the 5-minute. And then they're not just killing penalties. The teams all of a sudden are getting no chances. It's hard to say that it's just because of Marcus Kruger, but that helps. And he wins those defensive zone draws, and that's so key to win that initial face-off. How many times have we seen it this year where they lose that first face-off, and within the next 14 seconds it's in the back of the net? You win that initial draw, you get it down, and you kill 20 seconds off without even thinking about it. And that's key. Obviously, that's huge. I've said it for years. Especially in the postseason, I would rather have a shutdown penalty kill than a deadly power play, and I still stick to that. I'd rather be able to kill penalties than score on them.
Mm-hmm. I think, like Greg said, it's the defensive zone play of Kruger that makes him so invaluable to this power play. With him out, near the end, as it got closer to him, returning, Artem Anisimov was sort of the top center on the penalty kill units. And Artem Anisimov, he hadn't won a faceoff since Vietnam. He couldn't win a faceoff for his life. And like Greg said,
it's never been his strength.
Yeah, so many times he would, lose faceoffs and it'd be in the back of the net. Kruger doesn't do that, and it makes a huge difference for a penalty kill when you can win a faceoff and clear the puck right away, and get the other team kind of on their heels, and they're having to come back at you as opposed to them being set up and running a play right off their face-off. When you can kind of logjam their entrance, which the Blackhawks are very good at on the penalty kill, that is a position. You're in a position of strength as a penalty kill unit instead of a position of weakness of letting them sustain offensive zone time. So I think that's one of the things that Kruger just does so well. And then it's just, I think, in a lot of ways, Q trusts him more, and so he doesn't really experiment as much. There was, 3 or 4 different penalty killing units where Coach Q was just rolling out different guys, and I think in some ways just kind of seeing maybe this one will work because the penalty kill was so bad. With Kruger, he knows that when he sends him out, it's going to be a reliable unit, even if he's with, Joe from down the street. Kruger's going to make him a good penalty killer somehow because that's just what he's so good at. And so that's it. Having him back has been huge, obviously, for this team with the perfect penalty kill since his return.
I think he's a great guy for matchups too. He's someone you can throw out against the Getzlafs, the Kopitars, the Carters, because he can handle it, and he makes that difference. That fourth line is able to, I'm not gonna say shut down, but they can play them at even strength, which is what you want. And then the Taves line and the other lines can work more offensively. Matchups is what Marcus Kruger changes the most in my mind, guys.
Yeah, I agree with that. You look at, last year's, Western Conference and Stanley Cup Finals are just a picture-perfect example of that, where, that fourth line of Desjardins, Kruger, and Shaw bottled up the Getzlaf line in the Western Conference Finals a lot, and they were able to handle the triplets out of Tampa Bay, and those were two of the best lines in the playoffs until that point. And then, when Jonathan Tay's line is able to just kind of be a wash with the other team's first or second line, depending on which one Kruger takes on, then the Blackhawks' second and third lines are better than most other teams' third and fourth lines. And so the Blackhawks are in a position of strength there. And so that's what, like you said, Kruger's matchups is what makes him so effective and is one of the big reasons why the Blackhawks are able to be such a dominant team come playoff time.
Greg, you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I mean that's pretty much spot on, and that's why I still have some hope for the playoffs, is because then the matchups become so key, and having, being able to get shifts with your second and third line against third and fourth lines, could make a difference in a series.
Nice segue, because this will be your forte, because what we brought you on for. Obviously, the Blackhawks have their issues. Really, only two reliable defensemen all season. Duncan Keith's suspension, Corey Crawford's injury, as we've all touched on. But it's not like the other Western Conference teams and contenders don't have their issues. I mean, the Kings, they don't have the deepest defense. The Blues are the Blues. We don't really have to get into that, guys. Save your jokes or not. We do. I'll appreciate that. The Stars don't have playoff goaltending or playoff defense. The Predators just lost Ryan Ellis. I'm not sure if that's a serious injury, but they called up somebody, so I'm assuming he's going to miss more than several games. And then the Blues also did lose Robbie Fabry. I don't know if you guys saw that. It was pretty bad.
They say day to day, but that looked pretty awful.
That looks worse than Roosevelt last year, in my opinion.
Yeah, so the other contenders have their flaws, and that's where the Blackhawks, I think, can take advantage. Greg, you're the one to sort of piggyback this. Come on, be the ray of sunshine here.
Well, I'd love to do that. And listen, I've been covering this team long enough to know you never dismiss them, you never write them off. They've knocked on death's doors so many times and come out on the other side unscathed. It's starting to pile up signs to say, hey, maybe this is a year we lower our expectations a little bit. The Crawford thing, the Keith suspension now. Seabrook has not been good. You don't have the defense that you relied on. The core guys who've been here the last 3-4 years, they're starting to look tired because they've played more hockey than anybody. So the signs are there that this could be a really short run. But with that being said, for reasons you said too, I'm not saying that they can't make another run to another Stanley Cup. I just don't know if they will. But there's a different beast come playoff hockey time, and this team knows that and understands that better than anybody in the league. They're going to need some things to go right for it to happen. And it's so weird being on Twitter last night and seeing people saying that they'll be furious if they don't win a Stanley Cup this year. And it's like, wow, how far has this team come? Like, that's not something to be mad about, that you have an ownership and a general manager who has tried all season to get the perfect team and they come up short. You don't get mad about that. You'd be disappointed. Don't be mad. What you'd be mad at is sitting in the United Center in 2001 and having them say, hey, Doug Gilmour, Lyle Odeline, and Wendell Clark, these guys are still good players. That you get mad about. An early playoff exit, here's where my optimism will come from, because I don't know how long the playoffs are going to last for the Blackhawks. It's so hard to guess. As I said, you can't write them off, but it's so hard. They've got so many things working against them right now. And maybe that will be something that they can use in their favor. We shall see. But an early playoff exit this year would not be the end of the world for this team in their current situation. Yes, it will be disappointing. Yes, you want them to win every year. But look at what they've done. Stanley Cup final, 7-game Western Conference final, Stanley Cup final. the Kings were in the same situation. Stanley Cup Final, Western Conference Final, Stanley Cup Final. They missed the playoffs last year. They had an extra 6 to 8 weeks of rest, and now look where they are. They could be winning their third cup in 5 years this year. So losing in the first round, it would suck, but it might not be the worst thing for this team. Where now you're going to get an extra few weeks to recuperate. You have a bunch of guys that hate losing, and that's only going to make them even more hungry, so to speak, for next year. So, yeah, they can win a Stanley Cup. I don't know if they will, and if they don't, that's okay.
Adam, I need a drink after that. Tell me something good.
I don't know. This week, you asked Greg to be optimistic. I'm gonna kind of play devil's advocate here, if you don't mind.
That was optimistic?
I mean, you asked him to be optimistic, and that's what he gave you. So now
I'm
gonna warn you now that I'm gonna play devil's advocate here and just say, like, as easy as it can be to say that the Blackhawks have been here, done that. You look at this roster. So many of these players have not been here and done that. So many of these players have not had to win a Stanley Cup or go deep in the playoff series after doing it, the previous year and the previous 2 years. Guys like Fleischman and Weiss and Panik, and even Tavo hasn't had to make consecutive playoff runs. Anisimov and Panarin have barely. Panarin's never been in the NHL playoffs. Anisimov's barely sniffed them, having been in Columbus. He, had a couple appearances, I think, when he was with the Rangers, but. And then the defense. I mean, what? Goodness gracious, you look at the defense. I mean, TVR not around for the playoffs last year. Airhawk never been a part of a deep run. Like, there's so many of these players that haven't been there, done that. That while the leadership core is there and obviously very important and can probably get these guys going and are obviously very good resources for these players that haven't done it. Like, there is plenty of reason to look at this team and think, oh man, like, I don't know, maybe this roster isn't built to do that. But I think that the Blackhawks are at their best in playoff hockey. I think Joel Quenneville's at his coaching peak when it's playoff hockey. So, I think the best, most optimistic thing you can say is that, like, these are the Blackhawks. They, as cliche as it starts to sound, they do have these kind of late regular season struggles almost every single year, and they still manage to have a strong playoff showing, at least, even if it's only one series. They should be able to at least be competitive in that one series, and so that's just what we kind of have to hope is going to happen.
They've really tongue twist. They've really only done that in recent years, though. I mean, I feel like that's something people ride on as soon as things start going badly. I'm not sure if that's a necessary trend. I'm trying to be the optimistic one, but I hate when. I'm not going to say hate, but. It's a little frustrating for me how fans will ride that. That's not necessarily a trend they've always had to do. Maybe it's because now they're a little older and they don't take the regular season as seriously, that they try to conserve their energy. But it's a cliche. Like you said, it's a cliche at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, you're right. It is kind of more of a newer thing. But I mean, you look at even like the 2013 run. Like, they won the. They didn't have a regulation loss in the first half of that season, and then in the second half, I think they lost 7 games in regulation. So, and they ended up finishing that, that 48 games year with like 12 losses. So that's like, 11 losses out of your last, or 9 losses total in your last 24 games. That's a little bit of stumbling into the playoffs a little bit, and people were worried that they had already hit their peak that year. And then 2014, where they did stumble in February, they did stumble in March. People worried, did they already hit their peak in the first half of the season? They go to Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals. 2015, stumble in February, stumble in March. People wonder, have they already hit their peak? They go into the playoffs, they win the Stanley Cup. So it is at this point, it's kind of been 3 seasons of late season struggles and then extended playoff runs. And so I think that you can kind of look at that. And as much as this year does definitely feel different, people have been saying it feels a little bit more like 2012. And I can agree a little bit to that point, but also it's not the same as 2012 because this isn't a team that didn't win the Stanley Cup last year. This is a team that, is a lot more playoff minded and knows that once they get in the playoffs, they're able to contend. And I don't think that the flop of having second place instead of third in the Central Division is really enough motivation for them to really, switch their give a shit meters to 115%. And once the playoffs come around, that's going to be the time they do that. As frustrating as it is now, I think that's kind of the most optimistic thing I can say is that, this is a team that has done it, and so that's why we can still believe in them. Right.
This is the Second City Hockey Ice Cold Podcast, where I was going to be here with my co-host Adam Hess, Greg Boyson of Let's Go Hawks and Go Fans Go, an NHL correspondent, joining us. As I said earlier, flexing his muscles. Guys, let's look to the future. Should they have that first-round exit, they might be signing, or they'll be working on signing some guys anyway. Frozen Four coming up, and the Blackhawks are heavily invested in there. Nick Schmaltz, Luke Johnson from North Dakota, and Chris Collin from Boston College will be playing in the upcoming Frozen Four on April 7th. North Dakota eliminated the Blackhawks' other top prospects, Team Michigan, with Tyler Mott. Who should people keep an eye on and get excited about in your mind?
Well, it's obviously Schmaltz. Schmaltz is the guy out of that bunch. Schmaltz is a guy that could be a Rockford Ice Hog as early as next season. There's been talk that they could be giving him his entry-level contract after this year. And I think if North Dakota goes on and wins the national title, that becomes the likelihood. So he's the guy to watch the most for. As far as like Luke Johnson and Callan go, those guys aren't top tier prospects at this point. Callan's claim to fame is being Jeremy Roenick's nephew. I mean, that's all I kind of know about him, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But obviously you want to watch those guys and get to see them up close. I've watched a couple of North Dakota games this year. Schmaltz is he's along the lines of not quite talent-wise, but he's along the lines of the Kane, Panarin, Tavo mold. Smaller forward, great hands, good vision. He's more of an assist guy than a goal scorer. But he's the guy to pay attention to the most because I think I would give it a 75% likelihood that he is playing in the Blackhawks organization with Rockford next season.
Yeah, I mean, Schmaltz is probably the Blackhawks' best prospect at this point. I don't know that there's anybody else that you can even put in the conversation.
Tyler Mott?
Tyler Mott he's close. He's probably in the top 10, maybe top 5. He had a really good year. He's a top 10 college player in the top, in the running for the Hobie Baker, which is Player of the Year award. Had a good year. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to get him signed. I think that he projects a little bit more as a depth kind of scorer for me. He doesn't, whereas I think that Schmaltz projects as, as a very good talent and a very good future player, and probably in a lot of ways, a top 6 forward. You look at this team, they're in a lot of ways, as crazy as it kind of sounds, they're kind of built for the post Jonathan Toews era almost already, because Teuvo Teravainen could kind of become their 1C as he continues to progress, and Schmaltz could be the 2, just because those guys have that kind of skill and that kind of playing ability. Now, again, we still have 7 more years of Toews, and so there's no point in really thinking about that, but my point is just that's how good these players are. That's the level that these guys are at. And so I think Schmaltz is that kind of player. I think Mott kind of projects more as a depth scoring, but maybe a solid, Richard Panik-esque player with a little bit more of a scoring touch. But, he's a little undersized, but he's got, he's good speed, good player with good scoring touch, scored 35 goals this year, I think. And, was one of the better players on a good Michigan team. And so I think he's a guy to keep an eye on too. And another guy who's not an official Hawks prospect, but who they've been rumored to be in on for a while, who plays for North Dakota. He's a line mate with Schmaltz, is Drake Kajula. And he, the Blackhawks have been very interested in him, and he's going to be a free agent whenever that ends. And so kind of watching him play, especially with Schmaltz, he's a guy that I'm very interested in the Blackhawks signing and bringing aboard as a Ice Hawk and keeping him in the fold. It's sort of like Tanner Kero And I know Hinostroza was
Tanner
a
Kira
draft
was
pick.
just another guy, though. Come on.
Yeah, but I think because, that kind of fold where they obviously trust Kiro. He's been here a couple times this year. So maybe Kajula can be a similar player in that way.
Yeah, I could see him either here with the Hawks with Schmaltz or possibly going the Flyers to play for Hackstall again. Those would probably be the two likely landing spots for him. But he could be a nice little addition, to play for the Hogs. Because you said, Nick Schmaltz is probably their top prospect, which is a fair assumption, which means, next year he'll get traded to whoever for whoever the top rental forward is.
Billy Poco alert as well. It'll be absolutely disaster. I mean, okay, not I shouldn't. That's hyperbole. Would it be disastrous if they didn't sign Schmaltz this year? Because he'll probably head to arbitration or that, at least that's what I've seen.
Free agency.
Free agency. Sorry, better word.
I'm not 100% sure how that works. If it's 3 years after your draft or end of your college career.
I think for college players, it's after your college career. Because I think you're looking, with the Jimmy Vesey thing right now with Nashville and Kevin Hayes, I think it's after your senior year.
Right. If you play your full college career without signing, then you're full. And he's only a sophomore, so I don't think you have to worry about that if he decides to stay in college next year. Because he'll be a junior next year. But I think they'd want to get that done just so they don't have another one of those situations. You guys, we interact a lot on Twitter. I've been enjoying the shit out of the Jimmy Vesey telling the Predators to, and David Poley gets to cry. It's one of his favorite things to do. I don't think we have to worry about that yet. We don't have a Kevin Hayes situation on our hands by any means. Even if he goes back next year, there's still nothing to worry about.
Yeah, and I don't think it'd really be a disaster, but I think I would be surprised on Schmaltz's part if he didn't come, because I think, I think he's still working on a scoring touch, but I think that in a lot of ways he looks pro ready, and the best way for him to work on a scoring touch is going to be to be in a pro environment. And he's a guy that is probably, if they sign him, he's a lock to make the Hogs and be one of their best players next year. And it's probably a dark horse candidate to be a depth player on the Hawks next year, considering the cap situation they'll be in. They'll kind of need some guys on entry level or cheap contracts, so maybe Schmaltz can kind of be a surprise player and make the team out of camp next year.
Yeah, and I don't think we can really compare it to the Kevin Hayes situation yet, because Schmaltz hasn't had any incidents in a stairwell. So,
and we haven't traded his brother. So.
Yeah, we haven't traded his brother, so there's no lingering animosity yet. Or
he's been playing for the Wolves this year. His brother is
his brother's in the Blues organization.
Yeah, in fact, when they drafted Schmaltz, they traded with San Jose that year to jump ahead of the Blues one spot because they didn't want the Blues to have both of them.
Yeah, although I don't think that Jordan, the defenseman, is quite the caliber of Nick, the forward.
Well, we hope not.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to Twitter questions, guys, because we actually had a few this time, or more than a few. All right, so I really love his handle. It's not necessarily creative in any sense. If you're listening, we still appreciate you listening. We still appreciate you listening. But still, Fart Sniffer asks, assuming the Hawks don't win the Cup, which we discussed, what off-season moves would you like, i.e. signing low-risk D-men, good possession, bottom six forwards, etc.?
Well, I mean, they're going to be limited in what they can do. I'd love to bring back Thomas Fleischmann. I really liked what I've seen out of him. Bring him back for another year. He's only making $750,000 this year. I mean, even if you give him a little bit of a raise, you can get him for under $1 million. He's the perfect type of player. My dream, I don't think it's going to happen for many reasons, would be to bring back Brian Campbell, who'll be a free agent this summer. But you're going to have to really work on that defense and get some veteran guys. There'll be guys out there. You look at the guys that were traded at this deadline. You need to get that the old adage, you don't know what you have till it's gone. You never realize how valuable Johnny Oduya actually was to this team until you went a full season without him. So you need to do something to shore up the blue line, and via trade, via free agency. The bottom line is the Hawks won't have a lot of money to spend. So they're gonna have to be very savvy, and don't expect any all-stars coming here is pretty much what I could say. But you don't really need any all-stars. You've got enough already.
Yeah, I think I agree about Fleischman. I don't really know about Campbell. With him being on the older side, he's an option definitely, but I don't know if I am really sold on bringing him in. But I think that maybe re-signing Ehrhoff might be a good idea. I don't really know how strong the defensive market might be. Maybe
Q hates Ehrhoff. They're not going to bring back Ehrhoff. Q hates Ehrhoff. He's in that doghouse. They're not going to bring him back.
I don't know. Maybe they will. I mean, if they're still. Hopefully, there's a playoff run in which Ehrhoff can make himself a Q pet. Who knows?
Can't let the guy that's going to score the overtime Stanley Cup winner in Game 7 of the Finals walk. You watch. It'll be Christian Ehrhoff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Shaw's ass.
There you go.
So, I like. I like Ehrhoff. I'd hope they would be able to keep him because he is a good possession driver from that back end, and he's a lot better than Q gives him credit for, and then that a lot of other people give him credit for. And I think that I think probably trading Andrew Shaw for maybe and recouping some draft picks is probably a thing that we'll see, or maybe packaging Shaw with Bickle to free up some cap space. That would obviously be a huge move for the Blackhawks and would be able to help them free up some space to make better moves and bring in more quality players, because that would free up a lot of their cap space and take them a little bit out of the cap hell that they're in.
Piggybacking off of that, I'd like to see them try, if they can swing something like that. I'm not sure. Obviously, they don't have enough money right now in any sense, but try to lock up Tavo or Panarin to long-term deal before they price themselves out. Obviously, those are two of your more talented players for the future. You can't let them walk away. You can't. You need to have them here for at least the next 2, 3, maybe 4 years for this new core. Adam, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, next question. Yeah, let me pull it up. Sorry. I was ready, but now I'm not. So his next question is from Farsniffer again, was what happens with Hossa next year? So Greg, you want to take that one first?
I don't know what he's looking for. He's here. He's not gonna go anywhere. And there's he doesn't have the goals we're used to, but otherwise everything else has still been at a relatively high level this season. Down the road next summer, do you leave him unprotected and hope someone does you a big favor and takes him in the expansion draft? That wouldn't be the end of the world. I don't know if that would happen with that kind of his contract and his age. But nothing's going to happen with Marian Hossa. No one's going to trade for him, and I don't necessarily know why you'd want to necessarily trade him either. So he'll be in the opening night lineup.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, he absolutely has a place here next year. I mean, even if his offensive skills are slightly declining, I mean, that's going to come with his age. You can move him. I'm not sure if they'd move him to the bottom 6 next year, but he's still really effective. He's still a really effective two-way player. And like you said, maybe leaving him open for the expansion draft wouldn't be the worst thing. I'm not sure if they want to keep a tight leash on him so he doesn't retire and they get the cap recapture penalties. But I don't even see that. I absolutely agree, Greg.
Yeah, I think I think worst case scenario for Hossa next year is that he kind of becomes a third liner. But this is kind of asked and answered before too, that there's no solution in which you get rid of Marian Hossa outside of a possible expansion draft because of the recapture penalties that would happen with him. He can't retire, and if you trade him, no team's really going to be willing to trade him because they'd have to kind of share some of your recapture on him. So it's just not, Marian Hossa is here until Marian Hossa no longer wants to be here, and if that maybe ends up being a Chris Pronger long-term injured reserve kind of deal, Maybe that's what happens. I don't know if the NHL is going to let that happen again, but maybe they will. Or it'll be Hossa playing out the rest of his contract as a Blackhawk, and we could only be so lucky to see Marian Hossa kind of pull a Yager and stick around for a while.
People are down on him because he has 13 goals. That's why. He's got 13 goals, but he still does. He's still more effective when he doesn't have the puck than the majority of the players in the league. So it's not like we've got another Brian Bickle out there.
Right. Last question from Farson before we get to other people. He also asks, address. All right, Greg, you might get mad. Address Taves' play this year. Is it concerning? He personally doesn't think so, and I have a feeling he'll say the same thing.
There were times this year where I didn't think he was healthy. There was a stint there where I think he was having his troubles at the dot. He wasn't shooting very well. But again, the guy's going to score close to 30 goals. He's going to do, people look at the points as the be-all, end-all of a player's measure, and that's unfair when it comes to guys like Taves, like Hossa, who are complete players. His possession numbers haven't been great this year. So, again, as we said earlier, he could be really fucking tired right now. I mean, that could be an issue which happens, and you would hope he would be a little tired after all the hockey he's played. So I'm not concerned about Jonathan Taves.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. There's really no reason to be concerned about Taves. When a guy is still putting up 50 points this year, what more do you want? At this point in the NHL, guys are basically elite scorers when they're putting up 60 to 65 points. So when Taves is probably going to finish this year with around 55, or maybe he can get hot in these last 5 games and get himself to 60. That's what you want. That's he does more than just offense. He's very strong defensive player, and that has remained this year. And so I don't really think there's any reason to be concerned about Taves. And his shooting percentage has been pretty low this year. I think it's one of his career lowest shooting percentages. So that's maybe that's a little bit of a concern, but that's also a lot of bad luck. And so you can kind of attribute it to that. And so I don't think there's really reason to be concerned about Taves.
Yeah, if you're really worried about Jonathan Taves, that he's past his prime already, you've been sniffing too many farts.
All right, we do have a lot more questions, but we're gonna do one more, and it's non-hockey related, but it's a great philosophical question. Brendan at Shy BDM asks, a bee flies into a stopped bus without landing. If the bus accelerates, does the bee get smashed into the back of the bus, or does it move along with the bus? Greg, your face is fantastic.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect any less from good old Brendan there. I don't know. Does the bus have beer? That's my question.
That's the most important facet.
That's the important thing.
Yeah, because if the bus has beer, I'm smashing the bee if he's in the way of the beer.
If I would have to guess, I've been in a car before where I remember when I was a little kid, I was always so confused, but when I would throw my toys up in the air in the back of the car and they wouldn't hit me in the face, they would land in my lap. I think that the bus has its own air system, and so the bee would stay where he is when the bus moved, and we would not see the bee die. But this reminds me of a very good joke that my dad once told me.
All right. Well, before you say it, is it actually funny or is it a dad joke?
Oh, it's absolutely a dad joke.
Okay, I guess just go ahead.
What's the last thing that went through the bee's head when he hit the window?
What?
His ass.
I enjoy it.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Again, all right, I'll admit I chuckled a little bit.
There you go.
I chuckled a little bit. Brendan, I don't know where you think of this stuff, man, but yeah, as long as the bus has beer or something, it's I don't know how to answer that. Adam gave you a nice scientific answer, so take that.
Go with his. It sounded a lot more smarter than mine. And that wasn't even real English there either. So that just goes to show you.
All right. Well, let's wrap it up here. Second City Hockey Ice Cold Podcast. Robert Zaglinski with my co-host Adam Hess. Greg, thanks for coming on, man. Really appreciate picking your brain. Really appreciate you breaking stuff down for us, coming on, sharing your knowledge, and awesome to interact with you on Twitter and just constantly just learn from you, man.
Hey, I appreciate it. Anytime you want me back, I'm here.
You can follow.
Now that I know how Google Hangout works, I can come back.
Yeah, we had to learn about it too, and it worked. I mean, it's not Skype or anything, but it helps us out. Guys, you can follow Greg at Greg Boyson on Twitter. Follow his work, letsgohawks.net, Go Fans Go, NHL correspondent. He's one of the best, in my mind, follows on Twitter, Blackhawks hockey in general. Really knowledgeable, knows his stuff. Follow the guy. Appreciate his work and on all lessons, and then
covers half the league too. For that,
he covers half the league. I mean, it's not just Let's Go Hawks. Like it's Let's Go everybody in any sense. He's everywhere.
Hey, it's better than getting a real job.
Yeah, I bet. And then follow Adam at _ Adam Hess. That's lowercase Adam Hess. Follow me at Robert Zaglinski, Second City Hockey. Read our work there. We'll be back next week. Second City Hockey Ice Cold Podcast. Thanks for joining us. Signing off and stay classy, everybody.